education. Voters of Denver. Yay. For those of you who are used to being in the ground floor room, I need to do what is euphemistically called housekeeping, which means telling you where the bathroom is. And if you go out the door and to your left, there is a bathroom here on this floor. I'm Susan Stark. I'm the co-director of program for Legal Women Voters of Denver. I say co-director, but there really isn't. Okay. I are it. But if anyone would like to join me and work with me on program, I'd be more than delighted to welcome you. It has been said that program is the heart of Legal Women Voters, though I think that the voter service folks would say that they are the other half of that heart. Program has as its basis both education and action. Tonight's focus will be educational, but the League also believes that government policy, programs, and performance should incorporate the following criteria: competent personnel with clear responsibilities, coordination among agencies and levels of government, adequate financing, well thought out fiscal policy and government efficiency, effective enforcement, well-defined channels for citizen input and review. And I think all of those criteria really apply to the program that we're offering tonight. We've invited Tim O'Brien, Denver City Auditor, and Matt Fritz-Maurer, who is the Denver Labor Executive Director, to speak with us and to give you some insight in how the program committee selects briefing topics and speakers. We have wanted to address the importance of fiscal oversight and the auditor's responsibilities and jobs for quite a while, but you will remember that there was an election last year. And we support issues, we cover issues, but not candidates. So we had to wait until after the election to invite you here again to be with us. Cindy Sestrich will introduce our speakers shortly. And we will have a Q&A after the speakers present their program. But I'd like to tell you about some of our upcoming events and briefings. First of all, on September 28th, we are resuming our Drinks and Dialogue program, which was something that we enjoyed a lot before COVID. And we're excited to start this again. This will be on Thursday, September 28th from 5 to 7 p.m. for drinks, conversation, and an opportunity to become more informed and active in your local government. It will be at a place called the Town Hall Collaborative, which is on South Santa Fe. And we welcome special guests from the Colorado Black Women for Political Action Group. And there's a way for you to RSVP on our website. Next, so that's September 28th, the Thursday night. Next, on Tuesday, October 3rd, we will do a virtual Zoom briefing, as we did most of the last couple of years, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. about the November ballot issues. We are co-sponsoring this briefing with the Colorado Social Legislation Committee, and they will join us as Zoom attendees. Speakers and a video produced at the Colorado State League office will be utilized to help explain the complex, I think it's the word that they're using to describe it, position HH. So we hope you'll join us for that on October 3rd. We have two briefings in October. The second briefing will be on October 17th. And we're back in person in this room at 5:30 for a briefing on ranked choice voting. And previously, Denver Legal Women Voters has taken a position to support ranked choice voting. We will have speakers from the ranked choice voting Colorado organization, Linda Templin for that, and representatives from our Denver Elections Division to explain how the Elections Division would be prepared to do ranked choice voting. The most fun event to tell you about is on Saturday, October 7th, and you will see flyers on the back table about this. We are going to host Espiritu Latino here at the Miller Center after church at 2 o'clock on that Saturday. And for more information, you can look for flyers on the back table or go to our website, lwvdenver.org. This is a fundraiser for the, but it's also an event to celebrate the Latino influence that has been part of our part of the country for several hundred years. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cindy Sestrich, and Cindy will introduce our speaker. I'll see you again for the Q&A.
As Sue said, we have been wanting to have Auditor O'Brien for a long time. And we're so excited that we are having one of the best offices in Denver that's efficient, that tells the public what's going on and responds to the public. It's just fantastic what has happened the last 8 years. We appreciate it. And if you haven't been to the website, please go because it's so full of information. You can spend hours. Our Denver auditor, Tim O'Brien, is a CPA and one of the most highly regarded auditors in Colorado. So not only us, but other people know about him too. He is now serving the third of 3 terms, 4-year terms for our city. So we will see him for another 4 years. And he oversees both the Audit Services Division and the Denver Labor for the city and county of Denver. He is licensed in Colorado as a certified public accountant. He has an MBA from the University of Colorado and holds the designations of Chartered Financial Analyst and Chartered Global Management Accountant. With more than 40 years of auditing and accounting experience, Auditor O'Brien has served on numerous public and private sector governing boards and was Colorado's state auditor for 11 years. So he comes with a lot of good experience. He is an appointed member of the U.S. Comptroller General's Advisory Council on Government Auditing Standards, where he serves as a leading expert in the nation. He has also served as chairman of the Board of Trustees of Colorado Public Employees Retirement Association, CARA. He also has won a multitude of prestigious awards and honors that are national and local and regional. And you can go to the website and look at all of these. This is very impressive. Auditor O'Brien has dedicated his professional life and legacy to serving not just the people of Denver, but people all across the state of Colorado. He strives to exemplify every principle of good governance through his work and leadership. And we welcome Auditor O'Brien to tell us more about your office. Thank you. Let's see if we can stand.
Oh, that's nice.
And we'll turn it back on.
If you get too uncomfortable, we'll turn it back on. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. That was very nice. And I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Much better.
Right. I am proud of, I guess, my track record, here in Colorado and as a CPA and as an auditor and now as a public official. But I'll tell you what I'm most proud of are my kids. And we are expecting our 6th grandchild, we know it's a boy, on St. Patrick's Day. So we're planning to celebrate by all of us going to Ireland for a few weeks and showing, I don't think we'll show the grandkids what Guinness is yet, but we'll do that. I'm delighted to be here. I enjoy talking about the work that we do in the auditor's office. Rocio, if we can go to the next slide. Our mission is we really provide independent, transparent information to you, to the public, to people that really care about the city and county of Denver. Our work is performed on behalf of everyone in the city, residents, workers, decision makers. These are the offices in Denver. You know what the elected offices are in Denver. We're all on the same cycle. Council terms are not staggered. We're limited to 3 terms, which is different from the state and other local governments. And I'll tell you why I think that is the way it is. I believe term limits passed in the state of Colorado in 1992. And at the time, it was to be effective for any elected office, including, our members of our congressional delegation. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. You can't, impose a restriction on the federal government. So it did apply to Denver and it applied to the state of Colorado. And at some point, Denver is what's called a home rule city, where we can say, we think in the public's best interest that we can pass a law that will, basically overrule a state law. So Denver did that. It got back on the ballot and said, instead of 2 terms, we want Denver elected officials to be 3 terms. I think what happened, I was not part of that at that point in time. I think the voters saw term limits and said, yeah, of course we want term limits. And they voted for it again, not knowing that they changed it. That's my opinion. I can't really support that factually like I would in an audit. Next slide, please. Thank you. I like to tell you and everyone that where your tax dollars go, the auditor can go also. And for the most part, we're able to do that. We do that with the audits that we do conduct, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. We have wage enforcement that we do. Matt will get into that a little bit deeper. There's an audit committee for the city and county of Denver. It's called the Independent Audit Committee. I'm the chairman as the auditor of that committee. I appoint 2 people to the committee. The mayor appoints 2 people. And the city council appoints 2 people. And I think we've got a pretty good group of people that are on that committee. We have a new member starting actually Thursday. But, we have got, I think, a group of experienced people, in finances and government and things like that, as well as have been together for a significant amount of time. I was elected in 2015, 19, and again in 23. And if you voted for me, thank you very much. And I won't get into campaign. Next slide.
You learned your lesson.
I sure did. But I do have an issue I'd like to talk about. Sales and use taxes that's really the general fund. Half of the general fund is made up of sales taxes that we pay, when we purchase goods. The green portion of those bars are the sales tax for eating and drinking establishments. And so you can see what happened in 2020 with the pandemic. We went from 147 million, almost in half, down to 80 million. Came back rather rapidly in 2021, and we should get those 2022 numbers up there, but it is increasing again in 2022. We've had, I think, a pretty fair comeback in terms of, if you look at 2019 as a base year of 900 million, we were up over 10% to get to almost 11 1.1 billion sales taxes. Next slide. So we have money come in, we have money go out, and what's left over is a general fund balance. And I'll add this chart. I describe the fund balance different than maybe our budget people and our finance people. But any dollar that I think is available for appropriation is part of the fund balance. They have what they call special revenue funds, which don't meet the accounting definition of special revenue funds. And those are available for appropriation should the situation, the economic situation in Denver get dire. But the general fund balance, is up over $440 million at the end of 2021. That's significant. That's about 25% of the general fund revenue. That's a pretty healthy fund balance. And a lot of people debate about, how much should the fund balance be? Should it be 25%? Should it be 15%? The conservative CPA in me likes a greater fund balance. The taxpayer in me doesn't want the government saving my money for me. I think I'd rather, be charged with doing that myself. But the fund balance was significant in terms of getting us through the pandemic without having to cut, services significantly across the city and county of Denver. The other thing that it does, which is very important, Denver has a AAA rated bond rating. Not a lot of municipalities have a AAA rating. Denver does. And when the underwriters look at our financial statements and they see these kinds of numbers, they say this is low risk that Denver will ever default, in a bank. That means that we have a lower interest rate. When we as voters approve a bond issue, say the bond issue is for $1 billion, that includes the interest that would be paid back to the bondholders. When we have a lower interest rate, that means we pay less interest. We have more dollars that go into, things like playgrounds and, roads and, whatever infrastructure, we might be building. Next slide. The other big part of Denver is the airport. And the airport is right now over $1 billion a year in revenue. The green bar is what's available after expenses, which is the black bar. So we've got almost $1 billion in revenue in 2021. I know we went over $1 billion in 2022. Our profit margin is a little better than 50%, which is a huge profit margin. The difficulty is, in order to get into the airport business, you have to build an airport. And, that's a pretty capital intensive operation out there. It's a fascinating operation. So you can see what happened during the pandemic also. A lot of that revenue that is shown there is money that came in from the federal government to keep the airport going, so that we would be ready to have the airport back on track, planes should. They were still flying, but they weren't really too cold. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm required by city charter to produce an audit plan the third Monday of October of every year. So we have a 2023 audit plan, of course, and in less than a month, we'll have another one for 2024. The idea behind that is to kind of give the bureaucracy, the administration, notice as to which departments we plan to audit in 2024. We don't have any particular department on a regular cycle. Like we're going to audit Parks and Recreation every fourth year or something like that. We don't do that. And I'll talk about how we go about selecting organizations for audit. But we do what are called performance audits. The financial audit is an important audit to make sure that the money, that the bureaucracy was a good steward of your taxpayer dollars, that it's accounted for properly in the books and records, classified, et cetera, et cetera. The performance audit kind of gets at the question, so what did we get? We know the dollars were spent, but what did we get? And we do a lot of performance audits, and that's what a lot of those awards that we've received are about. Contract audits, we're looking to make sure that if the city purchased, 100 pounds of nails, that we got 100 pounds of nails, and that they were of the quality that we contracted for. Information technology, I mean, information technology is becoming a greater part of all of our lives. Government would not run without information technology, I can assure you of that. So we're spending a lot of time in information technology. We also are doing a lot of cybersecurity audits. Those audits will never be on the website because we don't want to hold up a look here sign for the bad guys out there, because we do find weaknesses in the city's cyber operations. But that said, I would also say that, you know, in the last 8 years, to my knowledge, there's been a lot of ransomware type of things, attacks on other, you know, governments around the country, large institutions. Denver has not had one. We have not had, you know, like a ransomware, and I think that's, I think the audit plays an important part in that, but most important is that the technology services people look at the audit as a tool to help them do things better. And it's been a very good partnership, and I wish all the departments had that kind of an attitude, but we'll continue to work on that. Next slide, please. How do we decide what to audit? Like I said, we don't, you know, audit every department on a given cycle. What we do is we're constantly doing what we call a risk assessment. And we keep track of all the risks that we see in the city. Audits that we're currently doing, I mean, we have to, you know, we start with a wide scope, we ultimately narrow it down. But during the course of the audit, we might hear about something else in the department. We keep track of that. And at this time of the year, we're evaluating which risks we think are going to be the most relevant ones for 2024, and that becomes our audit plan. We take information from the public at meetings like this. I'll give you contact information at the end. And if you have a concern about how your government is operating, we would like to hear from you. I'm not saying I'm going to do an audit because you send me an email or a phone call. But if we start to hear the same concern from around town, we're gonna, you know, think about attaching some resources to that. We interview the mayor. I meet with the mayor regularly. We interview members of city council. What keeps you up at night? What's the most concern to you, about the operations of city government? And that's what ends up in our audit plan. That's what we ultimately will work on in 2024. There will be risks that we identified in 2023 that we hadn't gotten to yet. Some of those will carry over into 2024, and some of those will not. We'll have new ones. Homelessness is a big one, obviously, right now. Public safety is a huge one right now. And we're looking at shelters right now. I think we'll have that audit. I'm trying to think if it's in December or in January. That won't be out. Housing is another important one. We have an audit coming out on housing. And if any of you have tried to deal with the Community Planning and Development Department on permitting, we have an audit coming out on that. You probably know what some of that was saying. Next slide, please. Some of the audits, police department operations and staffing, I would say that the chief of police was very receptive to the audit and the kinds of recommendations we had. The Great Hall, that's the Great Hall of the airport, the tented area that, you know, unfortunately has been in the news for at least 6 of the last 7 years. The biggest problem, you know, there was, we had a contract with a company out of Spain for Robial, and the city broke the contract. It cost the city over $180 million to break the contract. If you think back to those slides, those bar charts on the revenue that the airport makes, they could afford to break a contract like that, which I didn't personally like at all. Some of my tax dollars go up there also, but when they contracted again to really finish the job that was estimated to be $700 million back in 2015, they did what they call a sole source. They did not document why they made the decision about who the contractor was. In fact, they were told by the then CEO of the airport, do not document this decision. But I don't think that's the kind of accountability and transparency that people in this room like or appreciate. What else was I gonna say about the grade? I could talk about the grade. Oh, yeah, we started at around $700 million, maybe it was $800 million. We're up to 2.1 billion estimated for the redevelopment of the current grade. The airport hotel out there that opened in 2017, I think, 519 rooms. That was over $700 million. That was like, that's like $1.3 million per room. I've stayed at the hotel and those are not 1.3 million. Oh, you know, we had a lot of that encampments. Unfortunately, one of the problems for the homeless people is that when there's a sweep, their articles, their possessions, their clothing, whatever it might be, their tents get taken, and they're taken to a site where they're available for the people to, you know, go pick them up. The site is fairly far away for people that are homeless, that don't have transportation. The hours of the place being open were kind of awkward. I mean, like 6 in the morning until 8 in the morning. And they meet maybe on Saturday, you know, like 4 in the afternoon to 6 in the afternoon. Don't quote me on those times, but they were awkward times for people to be able to go and find their belongings. Some of the belongings were, you know, retrieved, but for the most part, they are not. Sidewalks, I know we all have sidewalks and we're all going to get taxed on sidewalks. We had done an audit on sidewalks and really the city, by its own estimate, it would take them 80 years to complete the plan, but they had to do all the sidewalks. And I don't know that the plan under this new sidewalk program that we passed is a lot better. There's a labor issue and there's actually a material issue. I mean, do we have enough cement? You know, I think it's like building the Hoover Dam. I think, you know, it's a big construction project. And the council is really talking about, you know, is there a way to delay this tax and really get a better handle on what is the plan going forward by our Department of Transportation? And we'll go through them all. What else could I mention? Trash recycling, the last one. You know, we had an audit that was released, I think, in December of last year. Pretty much said, we don't think the Department of Transportation is ready to do this. And I think they're still having difficulty with it. What I don't understand is that we went from the recycling to being picked up every other week to every week. Well, I mean, how does that fit with, you know, being green? I mean, you have these trucks running up and down the street. In some neighborhoods, that's a real problem. I mean, you can't get a truck down the alley. You try to get your trash bin out to the street, you can't get the truck in. I mean, it's been difficult. The big issues that we saw in there is that in terms of their staff of drivers, they were down 20% in staff. And the fleet of trucks, I want to say about half of the fleet of trucks had a life expectancy of 3 years or less. So it was kind of a prescription for problems. And they have had problems, and they've had to contract with, you know, people like Waste Management to use their trucks, things like that. The other thing, when you've got that many people, you know, that many vacant positions, you're asking your current staff, you know, to work overtime, almost on a permanent basis, and that's a surefire way to burning people out, and they'll find another job. So, next slide, please. Okay, I get to rest. I'll turn this over to Matt.
I know you're just doing that because I'm wearing the pin. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Fritz Mauer. Sue deserves a lot of credit for getting my last name right. During the elections. Yeah, lived with it my entire life. Thank you. I am the executive director of the Denver Labor Division of the Auditor's Office. Who here has heard of Denver Labor? Promise I won't call on you. Have you heard of Denver Labor?
No.
Great, this is going to be fun. Have you heard of wage theft?
Yes.
Okay, good. Rocio, you can go ahead. Thank you. I need my glasses for this, which is just embarrassing.
No, it's not.
I couldn't before, I can now.
Just to wait.
Okay, we should come back. So we're a division of Denver's auditor's office. I really think of us as having three divisions. There's a communications division, which Rocio and her colleagues are a part of. Audit services division, I think is what you all are most familiar with. And then there's Denver labor. And our goal is to protect Denver's employers and also workers in Denver by enforcing basic workplace laws. So there are four that we enforce. The last one really encompasses a lot. Prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon. Anyone familiar with these terms? Okay, again, I won't call on you. These are laws that are based on the idea that when the government dedicates money to construction projects or services, the people who build those projects or perform those services ought to be able to make a decent wage. And so the prevailing wage is basically a minimum wage that applies to a project based on the type of work being performed and the classification of the worker. I'll give you examples. An electrician or an elevator mechanic or a carpenter. They all have rates set by law that we enforce, and that applies to government contracts. And the idea is to prevent a race to the bottom, make sure that people are being paid skilled workers' wages for skilled work. The people who build the city can afford to live in the city and enjoy this. The minimum wage, Denver was until recently the only local jurisdiction in Colorado with its own minimum wage law. Anybody know what the other jurisdiction is? It's brand new and it's tiny. Edgewater has joined our Edgewater, yes.
And is theirs the same as ours?
So it's not the same as ours, but they tied theirs to ours over time. So I think they're going to catch up to us and then track with us.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially, yes, just not until 2028 or something. And then
1729.
1829
No.
in January.
18.
In January, yes.
Right.
And as an example of how good our comms team is, they came up with the slogan, "Every dollar counts," as we educate people about the new minimum wage. And then finally, we enforce civil wage theft. Anybody familiar with the ordinance that City Council passed in January earlier this year? Heard of it a little bit?
Old one.
The old,
It's been there for 3 or 4 years already, right?
I think minimum wage has, and then civil wage theft really dramatically expanded what Denver labor can do. So previously, we could collect prevailing wage, which is on a limited number of projects, right? Government contracts. Minimum wage, which is terrific, but that's only one law. But now under civil wage theft, we can collect paid sick leave, unpaid vacation that people are entitled to, unpaid overtime if they're making more than minimum wage. If somebody is promised a certain amount of money and they work and they don't receive that money and it's above minimum wage, we can now go after that. And so it's really basically expanded our jurisdiction. So anyone who works in Denver who doesn't receive the wages that they're entitled to under any law, state, federal, or local, they can come file a complaint with us. So previously we covered, around 120,000 workers, I think. Now we're over 500,000 because we cover pretty much everyone in the city and county of Denver. We can also,
Those are the other ones that they can do something.
good question. Denver has its own prevailing wage ordinance, and the federal version of that is called Davis-Bacon. And there's some differences between the laws, but I'm not going to bore you all to tears on Tuesday night. They're essentially the same. So we talked about the minimum wage, went into effect January 1st, 2020. Now it's $17.29 per hour, going up to $18.29. The reason for that is that Denver City Council did something really smart, which is they tied the minimum wage to inflation, right? So inflation goes up every year. Federally, our minimum wage has been $7.25 for 15 years, I think. It loses its purchasing power every year. Denver's ensured that that's not going to happen just because of inflation. And then there are some exceptions to the minimum wage. The takeaway is that food and beverage workers can be paid a little bit less than minimum wage based on the assumption that they're getting tips, and they'll make at least minimum wage for every hour they work. And if they don't, then they can file a complaint with us, or we can do an investigation and get them the money that they're entitled to. You can go to the thank you. January 2023, Denver City Council passes a new civil wage theft ordinance, which created new procedures and penalties regarding civil wage theft. Our office is the only office that enforces it. And civil wage theft has a really simple definition. It occurs anytime workers aren't paid the wages that they're entitled to. This is our favorite chart. So a highlight of our work, every year we audit 86,000-ish payrolls. This is on prevailing wage sites. So as part of the prevailing wage law, the deal is if you're going to take money from the city and county of Denver for your project, your contractors have to submit certified payrolls so that we can see everyone is being paid properly. And we audit around 86,000, always over 80,000 every year. It's a tremendous amount of work by a team of about 16 people. Since Auditor O'Brien came into office, we've recovered millions in underpayments, and we try to be as user-friendly as possible. And I want to put this in context a bit. Auditor O'Brien was sworn in July of 2015, right? It was still July back then. And one of the first things that the office did was modernize Denver's prevailing wage ordinance. Now, back then, the office could only enforce the prevailing wage ordinance. There was no minimum wage, there was no civil wage theft. And the key change was that our staff started to audit every single payroll record. And we found massive underpayments. So in 2015, recovered $84,000. In 2016, $700,000. And about $500,000 of that came from a single case where shuttle bus drivers at the airport weren't being paid the prevailing wage. Were they making about half of what they were entitled to? Right. There's a great picture on our website, I think, of Tim standing with a gentleman, giving him one of these giant novelty checks for $70,000. He thought it was a scam at first, right? But he eventually for his money. Compliance got a bit better, 2017 to 2018. And then we have another jump up in 2019 because City Council passes contractor minimum wage. In 2020, citywide minimum wage goes into effect. In 2022, that was previously our biggest year, another jump up because we could start doing what's called active enforcement. So a lot of jurisdictions will do a wage investigation when they get a complaint from a worker. The problem is a lot of people don't know what their rights are, when they're being violated, who to talk to, or they just don't believe that going to the government will do any good. And unfortunately, oftentimes they're right, not in Denver. But while we do complaint-based investigations, we also do a lot of active enforcement where we look at industries that we know are likely to have workers' rights violations. And we, on our own initiative, open up an investigation. And we often collect a great deal of money. And it's good for workers because they don't have to stick their necks out. And they don't really have to do anything in order to get the money that they're entitled to. And then, you can go back real quick. Oh. So this number is a little bit dated. We're closer to 1.6 million. And I don't want to jinx it. I think we might get to 2 million by the end of October, which is when our tracking period ends. And there are a couple of reasons why we are collecting so much more money than last year. One of the big ones is that the civil wage theft ordinance gives us the ability to impose damages for unpaid wages. So previously, if somebody was denied $100, we could collect $100 for them. But now the law says that we have to impose 12% interest, and we can impose damages of up to 300% unpaid wages.
Wow.
And to put this in context, looking at this chart, what you don't see is the lives of the people who we give this money to, money that they earned. But they are overwhelmingly low income. A lot of them are living near the poverty line. And actually, a lot of them, because of the wage theft that they experience, are living in poverty. And so damages are appropriate because when someone gets their wages stolen, it's actually really a problem for everyone in this room. They have to make hard decisions about whether to buy food or pay for utilities or transportation or to pay for rent, and they struggle. And those are all social problems, right? We all care if our neighbors struggle to pay their rent, even when they're working full time, or if their kids are going hungry, even when they're working full time. So we now routinely impose damages because we think this compensates people for the harm that they experience at the moment of their wage theft. I think now it's my turn to pass it back to you, Tim.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
What happens if it's an undocumented worker? Who are most afraid to
Absolutely.
bring up any problems? Do they get the money, and is that a problem or anything?
It's a massive problem. The biggest reason workers don't speak up
They're afraid.
is because they're afraid. Absolutely. We have a strong anti-retaliation provision. We do a ton of outreach with consulates, nonprofits. Rocio joined the office and had this brilliant idea that we should connect with immigration attorneys and let them know about our services. It doesn't matter to us what someone's documented status is unless they're experiencing threats. We take those threats very seriously, but they have all the same rights as anybody else.
Thank you.
Yes,
I have a quick question. Is this only city and county employees that you have power over, or can you do this to private companies? Can you collect from private? Okay.
so it's actually a little bit different. We don't have any authority over city and county of Denver employees. Government loves to give itself exemptions when it can. So it's all private sector workers. And it matters where the work is performed. If someone is working here remotely for a company in Atlanta, they're protected by our laws. And if they experience wage theft, they can file a complaint.
Okay, thank you. That was a big change.
Please,
All this money that you collected goes back to the workers.
back to the workers.
This doesn't fund your organization.
It does not. We think of ourselves as providing service. We have the ability to impose penalties, and we're starting to do that more. So damages go to workers, penalties go to the general fund. I expect that next year when you have us back, we'll have a chart showing the penalties we've collected, and there will be more money there that goes back to Denver. But we are not interested really in negotiating down on damages that someone is entitled to. It feels like we're taking away their rights. We're more willing to negotiate on penalties. So if we impose penalties and damages, we'll reduce penalties in exchange for quick payment to workers. Quick payment, 14 days. Yes.
Is it easy to see which industries, or is there some, reasons or people, employers aren't compliant? Do they know about this law? Are they dumb? What's this?
It's a mix. There are mistakes that happen. I think some mistakes are more understandable than others. The paid sick leave law might be more confusing than the minimum wage law. And the minimum wage feels like step one to running the business. There's a great deal of research on what industries are high risk, and they tend to be industries that employ lower income people of color, especially people who are foreign born and lack a lot of formal education. And we can identify what those are. And a lot of researchers have identified what those are and have pinpointed, these are the industries that consistently have the highest minimum wage violation rates. And so we use a lot of that research and also community tips in order to do our active enforcement. I see other, yes.
Well, I was wondering, you probably don't have statistics on it, but do you have a feel for this company has done, had to pay $1 million, so they're not gonna do it next time? I mean, do they reform and then?
It's a really good question. So think about two concepts. We're all familiar with deterrence, right? There's specific deterrence, which is a particular company is not going to violate again. And then there's the idea of general deterrence, which is that other companies will look at what we've done and think, I need to get my books in order. Research tells us that the imposition of damages, and specifically 200% damages on top of unpaid wages, is the most effective way to reduce violation rates over time. And so that's our target, because that's what the research supports. There's very good reason to think that in a few years, when we have the data and we can look at minimum wage and overtime violation rates in Denver from before the civil wage theft ordinance, so really before the minimum wage ordinance to 2026 or whatever, we'll be able to see a meaningful drop. That's the hope. Yes.
Is there a division of your department that educates workers, that goes out to tell people what their rights are?
Yes, absolutely. And again, a great deal of credit to Rocio's comms team, but we all do. It's time worked for the people at Denver Labor to staff a table at a community event or go educate people about their rights. And one thing that we work very hard to do is leverage community resources. I can only go to so many meetings, so can Rocio, but if we can talk to union organizers or nonprofit workers about what we do, and if they can spread the word in the community, that pays dividends for us. That's good for everyone. So yes, we work very hard on community outreach, and we also have a lot of partners who do the work for us. Please.
It seems that you don't enforce the equal pay law. Why is that?
It's a good question. The Colorado Department of Labor and Employment enforces that, and they are setting up a dedicated division that will consist, I think, of 5 lawyers and 1 paralegal that will be able to do the kind of sophisticated statistical and quantitative work to identify and prove equal pay violations. So 2 parts to that. 1, the law vests the Colorado Department of Labor with the primary authority to enforce that law, but also we're comfortable stepping back when there is a larger agency that is stacked with expertise. So for example, my friend Scott works on that team. Scott's got a PhD in economics. I am happy to let Scott do the quantitative. Okay, now I think I'll turn it on.
So Matt does know his stuff. He is a lawyer and he has a PhD in labor law, and you did your dissertation in
On wage theft.
Wage theft. So this position was such a good fit for Matt. I'm delighted to be working. The other thing I wanted to say about the labor work that we do is that, you know, people will say if you increase wages, a minimum wage, it's going to result in less jobs and revenue is going to go down and all this stuff. And Matt can give you the research better than I can, but the Colorado Fiscal Institute recently published a report that shows that wages go up in the restaurant industry. Revenues have gone up in the restaurant industry. I mean, all the opposite of what the naysayers said when the minimum wage law was passed. So I wanted to add that. I think that's an important part of the story. We've had some accomplishments and proud of. We've received this, what's called a Knighton Award for audits we do. It's the Association of Local Government Auditors. In 8 years, we've received 6 awards. I think that's a pretty good batting average. I hope we get a couple more before the end of my last term. I've been appointed to the Comptroller General's Advisory Committee on Auditing Standards. We really have, I think, an exceptional staff. On the audit side of the business, everybody, we have, you know, CPAs, we have certified internal auditors, certified fraud examiners, we have attorneys, we have information systems analysts, which has become more and more important all the time. But I think everyone has some kind of a degree or credential that I think distinguishes them as an exceptional auditor. On the labor side, I mean, we've really got the same thing. We've actually had some auditors that went to work on the labor side. So we've got auditors, we, for a while, had an actuary, we've got a number of attorneys, 4, maybe 5 attorneys, at this point. So, high qualified group of people that are working, in the best interest of the community, and trying to make Denver a better place to live. That's probably the common thread among all the people that work in my office, is that they live in Denver. They want to make Denver a better place to live. They might live in Englewood, or they might live in Thornton, but you know, as Denver goes, the state of Colorado goes, and they want to be sure that where they live, things are operating as they should. Next slide. So, keeping my promise to the community, years ago when I ran for this position, I would meet with a group like you, and somebody would inevitably say, I don't know what the auditor does in the first place. So how do I know if I vote for you that you're gonna do, you know, what you say you're gonna do? And I think it's a fair question. And I just thought, well, if I get elected, and I did get elected, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna tell people what's going on in the auditor's office. And I think I'm doing what I said I would have done 8 years ago, 8+ years ago, and a little bit more. And we're trying to outreach to the community. We have a newsletter. There's a sign-up sheet for the newsletter. I get a lot of good feedback on that newsletter. Social media, we're on, you know, all the usual suspects. There's, I'm not a social media person myself. I do a little bit of Twitter, which changed its name to X.
Yeah.
But there's what's called Ask the Auditor. It's on Channel 8. They run it regularly, and I think they're good. They're informative. We take a topic and we have myself and a number of staff, you know, doing work there. These kinds of meetings are important. You know, we've got the audit plan that I talked about. We produce an annual report that's usually ready, I think the 15th of January, where, you know, the city's financial statements, which is not an annual report, really takes until the end of June of the following year to be completed, which is a long time in my opinion. I think the work we do is substantial. I think it's impactful, and I think it's important to the community. So next slide. There's the contact information. auditor@denvergov.org is the email address. There's a phone number there. We do look at every email. We don't necessarily answer every email, but we read every email. And like I said, if we're going to hear the same concern around town, we're probably going to closely think about adding that to our audit list. Facebook, I don't know if you're on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook myself. I have a page because I was curious, you know, 10 years ago as to what it was like, and it's there. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes.
So when you do a audit of, say, trash, whatever, do you audit the numbers also where they spend the money, or just how well they're doing the job, or both?
Well, both. You know, we do report the numbers. I mean, the amount of money that would go into trash collection, and certainly the outcome of what it. But we were really looking at that program going forward, kind of thinking, are they ready to do this?
And then do you go back to see if they fixed any of the things you said were a problem?
I think somebody's given this audience a lot of questions that we are glad to answer. We do. We follow up on every audit recommendation we make that the department has agreed to. They agreed to about 94% of the recommendations. Since I was auditor, had been auditor, I would say of those 94% that were agreed to, probably half of those were actually. And I hope I get a little better leadership response from Michael Johnston. Yes.
I love the question.
If, let's say a grant program, that helps with the city, program like, yeah, tree or whatever, in the house or something. How do you audit house if they are? I mean, are they sending the beer back for that to the cybersecurity of the city?
Well, we're looking at the citywide network, if you will, and that includes the airport. While they are not, they are connected to the citywide network, and you're right. If somebody could breach the airport's network, they could get to the city and county network.
Right.
So we're always looking at all those kinds of possibilities. Mhm. Yes.
Do you have any authority to audit the Denver public schools?
No, I don't. You know, the public school system, it's really a creation of state law. The state auditor could audit those, but I think it might take legislation for the state auditor to do that. Yes.
What's your relationship with city council and what, you know, how did this DIA not get checked or approved or whatever could have been better?
Well, the airport, I mean, that contract was approved by city council.
Without details.
Well, no, they got the whole 1,500-page contract. And have about 30 days to look at.
1,500 pages?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
It's a big job. Right?
Yeah, right. So, they did approve it, and the relationship never got on the track. You know, another thing that happened that, when Denver signed the contract, they actually went to Spain to sign the contract. So I don't know if you've ever been in Spain, but they don't eat dinner until 9 or 10.
Right.
And you just had this overnight flight and you're tired and you're in jet lag and you've eaten dinner late and then you're gonna sign these contracts. And the one thing that you're probably thinking about is, I gotta get, I wanna get back to the airport and go home. I thought that was kind of a mistake. It should have been signed here in Denver. I mean, it was our money, it's our hotel, our airport rather. But it wasn't. I mean, that's not the way to do it.
So the steps were taken, they just weren't concentrated on it. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes.
I think the whole situation with the airport is interesting. I think you brought a lot of transparency to so many aspects of government. But I know we talked about at annual meeting, we were talking about groups that we'd like to observe and be sure things are being transparent. And someone brought up the airport and said, how do we do that? How did we reach into the airport because it's seemingly not very transparent? I mean, is there any answer to that? I mean, no. It's not like a quality government.
Oh, it's government. I mean, it is as much a part of government as parks and transportation.
But I mean, it's more independent.
No. I mean, the CEO of the airport is appointed by the mayor. And Mayor Johnston has appointed Bill Washington, who is the current CEO. I think you could contact Bill Washington's office and ask him if he could come and speak to them. You can also contact the mayor's office and say you'd like to know more about the airport. You know, it's quite an operation out there. I mean, the revenues really come from parking revenue is a big one. The concessions is a big one. And then landing fees. Those are the three major sources of revenue. We've been looking at the concessions. We looked at a concession. I think we had that audit report last fall. What we were looking at is how the airport oversees the concession contract. First, we looked at broadly, try to consider all the concessions, and then looked at one individual. The individual concessionaire came into our audit committee meeting and was yelling at me, that he should have, had a copy of the audit report. He should have had this, he should have had that. And it's like, you're not the subject of the audit. It's really the airport and how they oversee you or any other concessionaire. They're not overseeing the contract very well. And for me as an auditor, when you can't reconcile cash to sales, you've got a problem. And the airport, I mean, in terms of being, they thought everything's fine. The hotel out there, that's probably a $60 million a year revenue stream. The Marriott, West End's owned by Marriott, they're able to deduct expenses to run the hotel, of course, against that revenue stream. We wanted to audit that revenue stream of what expenses were being, charged against it. Marriott would not let us, have access to that. Oh, big red flag. And the airport would say, but we look at the bank statements. I actually had them send me the bank statements. And I mean, they're just numbers on the page. You could not tell, you could see the money's coming in, you could see the money's going out, but you didn't know if it was payroll for the airport hotel or if it was payroll for somebody in Atlanta. I mean, but they thought that they were overseeing. I think it's a problem. And again, they make so much money that, they can sweep these problems aside. If their profit margin is 55%, they think that's pretty good. And the airport has a tremendous reputation as being a huge economic generator for the whole Rocky Mountain West. And there's enough reports on that. I don't dispute that for a minute. But if your profit margin could be 57% instead of 55%, it should be 57%. Those are still public numbers. Yes.
In this report, there's a category called record management. And it wasn't amongst those that were listed. What organization or division is a part of record management? Because it appears as if since their 2020 audit, they have a number of recommendations that have not been completed,
Right.
or only partially.
So some audits will be within a given department. And then some audits will cross-cut across departments. And the records management is one.
So what types of issues exist and which departments are particularly require particular?
Housing is one, community planning and development is one, parks and recreation is one.
Oh.
Yes.
So does every county in Colorado have an auditor? No.
No, Denver's pretty unique. The auditor was put into our city charter in 1904. And it's been there ever since as an elected official. You've heard the term, we have a strong mayoral form of government, and you probably know what that means. It means the mayor writes the budget. And it takes the council a supermajority to override something. The auditor position, the auditor really used to be more of like a chief accountant for the city, had the books and records, had payroll, had the general ledger, had some actual audit responsibilities. In 2008, we changed the charter to make the auditor an auditor. And had it not been changed in 2008, I would not be standing here. Because it wasn't the kind of job that was. Yes.
How often are you finding fraud?
I wouldn't say we're finding fraud. If we do find fraud, I'm required to go upstairs to the district attorney's office. I do go upstairs and talk to the district attorney about things, where fraud could take place. But what the district attorney wants is to be, give me the facts that I can take in front of the grand jury and get them indicted. And that's a little bit different.
No.
I don't think, because government is so open. I mean, we all have a camera and a telephone, and we know what's going on. I mean, I think if there was an individual on the payroll that really didn't exist, if there was somebody, siphoning money off, I think that would come out rather early. So maybe that's the optimism in myself, human beings. Yes.
In your charters, have you seen a decrease in funding for Parks and Rec?
Oh, actually, it's been increased. There's a tax that we pay that goes into parks. It's 0.25% sales tax that we voted on. It goes to parks. And the thing that was in front of the voters said that this could not supplant existing funding. So it was to, provide further maintenance to parks and to acquire additional parks. And that's a pot of money that's growing. That's not being spent very well. We have a number of sales taxes.
Very well.
It's not being deployed as well as it could be. Yes.
What is your opinion on HH, which is gonna be on the November ballot? Does it affect you or Denver at all?
Well, I live in Denver. I'll tell you, I'm not gonna vote for it. I thought it was kind of offensive that the legislature and the governor would say, here's what we're gonna do for you. We're gonna reduce your property taxes by taking, the Tabor refund away from you. That didn't make sense to me. I think what will be interesting is sort of the people that are for it and the people that might be against it and how that campaigning will play out. Yes,
You said earlier there was an issue you'd like to bring to us. What is that?
there is. And actually, as I think, Susan, as you described what you looked for in government, I mean, competency, transparency, and public, dealing with the public appropriately. As to the competency question, I think the auditor should be competent to do the job. And right now, the city charter says that you have to be 26 years old, or maybe it's 30 years old, and a resident of Denver for 2 years.
Oh, no, that's it.
That's it.
That's all?
That's it. I can see that kind of requirement for a legislative body like the city council, because you want the council, the legislative body, to be representative of the people. So you don't want a high barrier for people to, have office. But I think the auditor is different. I certainly think the district attorney is different. I think there are positions in government that you should be qualified.
So what should we do?
Well,
Amend the charter?
we can amend the charter, and that's something I have a personal interest in seeing happen. I'll tell you what it's about. It's about raising money, getting signatures, and getting it on the ballot. Because I believe that if you get it on the ballot, it'll pass. It'll be overwhelming.
For just the city auditor position? Or
Yes,
for
for the city.
Yes.
Find a district attorney?
District attorney has to be an attorney. Yes, sir.
The city.
Previous auditors were not auditors, is that?
That's correct.
Yeah, are you saying something about our previous auditor? I can think of a few.
It was also interesting, the way you described the job, if they were auditing, they would have been auditing themselves. It sounded like they were in charge of payroll and all these other things, and they were also in charge of auditing. Not like they were auditing.
Let me correct that. They didn't have the broad audit charge that the auditor has today. The auditing would be of certain contracts. Like the airlines purchase fuel and they pay fuel tax, did they pay the proper amount of tax? And we look at things like that. Not at the kind of things that we're looking at. No, not really. Yes.
Do you follow what's happening, talking about cities nationwide, and how are we doing, and how is our auditing compared to other cities? What are the topics we ought to be thinking about for the future?
Well, we do look at what's going on locally across the country when we develop our audit. So, yes, in that respect, how are we compared to them? Nobody's better than them.
Can city council amend the charter?
the city council could refer something to the voters
Without getting the signatures.
without, well then, yeah, without getting signatures, and then it would be up to the voter. I don't think the city council is too receptive to the idea, because, well, they don't want to close the door on an office that they may want to run. And there might be a couple
On a
of
what?
office that they would like to run for.
Oh, God. Maybe we should.
Got a question in the back?
We do. We all the expertise that you have here as far as that. How do all the city departments view when your auditors go into the department? Are they receptive? Are they information gathering so they can do better? And what's the general status in that?
I think generally it's pretty good. Are they receptive? They cooperate. I mean, we have to get the information. And if they're withholding information, we usually find out about it. But, you know, we try to have a good working relationship with them. We have to deliver a difficult message from time to time. And that's part of our job. Like I said, the technology people think that we're great. I mean, that we've helped them really bolster, you know, the whole firewall and all that goes with that, to keep our network safe. I wish all the departments had that too. I wish the airport had that.
So the compliance rate, how do you motivate them to really reach that rate that you would like them to be?
I think right now, I don't know who the directors of all these departments are, because Mayor Johnston has not appointed everyone yet. And my hope is that Mayor Johnston will take a different tack than Michael Hancock did in terms of looking at audit reports, looking at, you know, audit reports that you agreed to the recommendations, but then you didn't implement them. I mean, I think he could stand up and, you know, be pretty affirmative about, we are gonna, you know, do these kinds of things. Yes, ma'am.
Following up on Sydney's question, how do you deliver the bad news? Do you just write out in the report that you send via email? Do you sit down face to face and discuss it with people? I mean, where's the personal touch in all of this?
Yeah. I like to think it's sort of a deliberative process where we meet with the agency at the beginning. Actually, we send a letter that says to the executive director that says we're going to conduct an audit. Here's the kind of information that we're going to be asking for. We'd like to set up what we call an entrance conference. Entrance, where we're going to meet with the key people for that particular program that we're looking at. Then throughout the audit, we have updates for the department. They're usually bi-weekly. Sometimes we've had departments say we'd like to do it weekly. Generally, after a while, they say, I think bi-weekly will work. We finish our field work. We have a field work exit conference with the department where the staff tell people what they found. We've found, you know, the kinds of conclusions, the kinds of recommendations that we're headed for. And then we write an audit report, which is an extensive process. I think a lot of times I think where you're headed with your question is, it's different when you hear it than when you see it in writing. And that's where, you know, and when it's in writing, I mean, the media can access it. I mean, it's on our website.
But how does it get from your office to the staff, which then tells the other people in their department? You have an exit
We have the exit conference.
Okay, so there's some talking going back.
Oh, yeah. And then, I mean, the final step is where we'll have a briefing with the independent audit committee, where my staff and then the staff of the department are there to discuss the findings, the recommendations, we agree, we don't agree, however. And then, you know, when we do the follow-up on the recommendations that were agreed, we have many of those in front of the audit committee also.
So they don't have to follow these recommendations.
No, they don't.
Even when they do.
Are you
Many governmental agencies are having trouble filling vacancies, things like that. Are you suffering from the same problem?
We had for a while. And I want to say we're pretty close to full staff right now. On the Denver labor side, that function will be growing over time, as it should. As we can get more people comfortable with coming forward and saying, you know, I think somebody didn't pay me properly. Right now, I mean, we're partnering with the Mexican embassy, the Guatemalan embassy, a number of the Canadian embassy, that's a big problem, but it's their constituents, you know, that are the people that are, you know, being abused.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
Bond packages that are passed.
Uh-huh.
Do you audit those separately or do you audit them within the department that is in charge of funding, using them?
We don't audit them separately. We do audit them when looking at individual departments.
So a bond issue could go through and they may be audited way down the road after the money has been used.
Yeah, and it, you know, it generally takes about 10 years to get the money out when a bond has been passed. I think there's still is some bond money left from Elevate Denver, which was 2008 or 2007, something like that. So it takes a while to get it out. And again, you know, I mean, similar to the sidewalk issue, you got to have labor and you've got to have the materials. Yes.
You audited the Denver preschool program in 2019.
Right.
And we now have, another ballot issue to extend that program and to continue, funding it at the higher rate that was last voted on. Do you have anything to say about that audit of the Denver preschool program?
So there's a 0.25% sales tax that we all pay that goes into this preschool program. There's a nonprofit corporation that was set up to really govern the deployment of those dollars. When we audited it, they had taken in about $40 million and had gotten maybe $20 million out of it. So I didn't think they were doing a great job of deploying the money. There are issues within communities about, you know, where they don't trust government. Not in this community, I wouldn't say, but you know, in some of the Latin communities in Denver, they don't necessarily trust government and they don't believe you that we're gonna, you know, pay for your child's preschool education. Now the state is in there, and ideally, the state should have done it in the first place. I mean, it is a statewide issue, it's really not local.
Do you have any idea whether it's improved since you did that audit?
Any idea?
Whether the situation has improved?
When we went back in and follow up, I think they were improved quite a bit. And I think they felt put on the spot by the audit, and maybe that got them, you know, moving. You know, if nothing else, you can increase the subsidy, you know, for the child, for the preschool. Yeah.
You mentioned that you thought the qualifications for the auditor should be upgraded a little bit.
Just a bit.
What would you say they should be?
I would say it should be a certified public accountant and or what's called a certified internal audit. That's another, you know, credential that we've got many people in my office that would qualify under that. The reason I would add the certified internal auditor is that I had talked about doing this and then COVID came along and, you know, everything got derailed. But one of the concerns were, would there be enough people, you know, could be become a candidate? You wouldn't want to have a ballot with no name. So to expand it, I think the credential of certified internal auditor credential, you know, a good So
And why did you have to be an auditor?
why did I want to be? I was a physics major in college. And one Saturday afternoon, all my friends are out playing baseball, probably drinking beer. And here I am in the physics lab, testing the torque of a spring with what's called a jolly. And I said, I don't want to be. And I went to my counselor and he said, well, you had an economics class, and you did all right. I said, how about business? And like went into business and got into accounting. And took the CPA exam and here I am.
He wanted to be in the exciting field of CPA.
Yeah.
I would agree with one.
Sure.
I was one.
You know, from time to time, my wife will have a little insomnia. And she'll lean over to me and say, darling, tell me about your day. Good enough to that.
I'm mindful of the time. Any other questions before we close this meeting?
That was a pretty good answer.
And no, he has a website and you can, if you think of questions afterwards, please submit those. We have really enjoyed this. Matt, your program is something that I certainly know nothing about it. And we are really glad that you joined the auditor to come here and discuss that. And there was just an article in the newspaper over the weekend, I think, about terrible problems with wage theft, particularly in agricultural and rural areas, which was,
Not a lot, no.
but I think these are really vulnerable people who really need to have advocates on their behalf. So we applaud you for the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
Sue, could we have one more thing? I'm gonna put the CEO on the spot. Tell us just a little bit what your department does.
Well, we are the communication department, and we do community outreach like this, and also media and social media. And we serve like two branches of the office, the audit services and the related. And we do a lot of education for businesses, for workers, for embassies, for whoever needs to get this to know. You know, like people have rights, you know, that there's someone that is advocating for them. So that's what we do. We put outside all this job the auditor system.
On the website, are there parts of the website that are translated into Spanish?
Yeah, we do a lot of work translating all the materials in both languages because we want to reach a more big community.
And I think the issue of generating trust in that community, more trust of government.
Yes.
That if they're abused in some way, or that there can be a response.
Exactly, that there's someone that can hear them and that we can speak to them in their own language.
Right. Wonderful. Good. We're glad you came.
Oh, thank you for having us.
So,